I usually try to have something really clever to say at this point, just so everybody can, settle in before we get started. But tonight, welcome, my children of the night.
3, 2, 1.
Excuse me. Huh, kids?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Chilling with Sasquatch, where I'm going to sit around and talk aimlessly to my co-host over here. English is hard. Usually. Words. You got them. What's up, Divine Sorcerer? Welcome in, bud. Good to see you. We got several people already up here in chat. A few. Got Mama Noel. Good to see her. There's somebody before that there. Where's he at? Make stupid people famous gets the gold.
What?
Mama Noel the silver. And April Rain gets the bronze. And remember, folks, there's a participation trophy coming in the middle of the show when nobody's looking. Sunshine's in here. You got some help. That's good to know.
Hello, April.
Welcome.
Divine Sorcerer.
Hit the like button while you're like swinging through. Did you know that 50 years after the escape from Alcatraz, the famous one, the FBI received a letter from a guy claiming that he was a part of it and he knows all about it. What's up, Tony? Good to see you, bud. Welcome in. And he, Catlin, good to see you. The individual that sent the letter claimed not only to have been a part of it, but to have been one of the guys who actually escaped. I don't think he identifies himself as which one he was, right? But he tells the whole story. He gives the whole layout of, like, we had figured out a lot of it, but there were like a few details we couldn't quite cotton to, like how did they get the inflatable raft to the roof? When you go into the walls in there, there's no way to climb up there, and somebody with a damn 40-pound worth of rubber rain suit raft is going to catch hell trying to get up in those tight spaces without ripping it. How the hell did they do that? He explained some of that in the letter, like how it was possible to do it, and the fact that they didn't do it until they had to. That's the way you do it right there. See, my man has the true magical touch. He does that thing that we all need to do when we find something we like. We share it and we like it, and then we ignore it so that it grows big and strong on its own. Is that part not right? That might not be right.
Yeah.
We water it, care for it. Yeah, that's what we do. Are you ready for this?
Yes.
All right.
Let's do it.
Do it.
just called Alcatraz, was a high-security federal prison located 1.25 miles off the coast of San Francisco. It's famous for several reasons, most notably for a daring escape attempt by 3 inmates. However, what makes this story even more fascinating is that one of the escapees actually sent a letter to the FBI 50 years after successfully breaking out of the prison. In this video, we're going to take a look at this letter and its content. Alcatraz and the Escapees. In June 1962, inmates Clarence Anglin, John Anglin, Frank Morris, and Alan West escaped from Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. This prison is known for holding notable criminals like Al Scarface Capone and George Machine Gun Kelly to 70s Boston mob boss James Whitey Bulger and Harlem drug kingpin Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson. Al Capone is undoubtedly the most infamous gangster in American.
So there's a book in circulation out there, and I can't remember the name of who wrote it, but the name of the book is Dope Fiend. And the book is written more or less about Bumpy, the Harlem drug kingpin, but it's done from the perspective of someone who knew him, not from the perspective of Bumpy. And so it's harsh. Caution is advised. This is not before nighttime. Like, you don't read this to go to bed at night and stuff. I'm telling you, it's harsh. Dope Fiend. It's a good book. I had considered reading it, and then I found out that there's a guy on YouTube that reads books like that, but he does it in the voice of Macho Man Randy Savage, son.
Shut up, for real?
I'm dead serious. There's a bot. Get this now. He is a bodybuilder who reads books on YouTube in the voice of Macho Man Randy Savage. Can you believe it? It's true. I can't remember his name. I have to go dig him up. Yeah, it's pretty good though. Because when she was walking down the hallway, she tripped over the bum's shoe, and she was certain that he was already dead. Oh, yeah. I had forgotten that dude existed. I got to go dig him up now. I wonder if he's still making content. Oh, Lord.
History. In 1920, during the height of Prohibition, Capone's multi-million-dollar Chicago operation in bootlegging, prostitution, and gambling dominated the organized crime scene. Capone was responsible for many brutal acts of violence against other gangsters. The most famous of these was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, in which he ordered the assassination of 7 rivals. Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison for tax evasion in 1931 and was transferred to Alcatraz in 1934, where he spent 4.5 years in relative isolation due to his deteriorating health and mental state. Machine Gun Kelly earned his place in FBI history after kidnapping a wealthy oil magnate in 1933. He demanded a ransom of $200,000 and threatened to kill his victim if the police were involved. However, the FBI tracked him down and arrested him after a shootout in Memphis, Tennessee. As for Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson, his story is another fascinating chapter in American criminal history, but we'll delve into the details of his life and exploits later, so stay tuned for more on Bumpy Johnson. Let's get back to our 3 main escapees. Starting with Frank Lee Morris, he was born in Washington, D.C. on September 1st, 1926. Frank Lee Morris had a crazy life that saw him entangled in a web of criminal activities from a very young age. His journey into a life of crime commenced when he was a mere 13 years old, marking the start of a troubled path that would lead to a series of arrests and convictions. By the time Morris reached his late teens, his criminal record had already accumulated a wide range of offenses spanning from narcotics possession to armed robbery. These early encounters with the law hinted at a pattern of delinquency that would continue throughout his life. During his early years, Frank Morris found himself within the walls of correctional institutions, where he served meals to his fellow inmates as part of his duty. As he grew older, Morris's criminal activities escalated. He faced arrests for crimes such as grand larceny in Miami Beach, car theft, and armed robbery, making him a familiar figure to law enforcement agencies. However, amidst his criminal endeavors, there was a remarkable aspect to Morris's life: his intelligence. Frank Lee Morris possessed an impressive IQ score of 133, a testament to his intellectual capabilities. This intelligence placed him in the top 2% of the general population, making him a highly gifted individual despite his criminal pursuits. This intellectual prowess would later play a significant role in the events that unfolded.
To put that in a type of perspective, this was an individual who apparently, from books alone, could acquire a skill. Through simply reading books from this prison library, he could acquire a particular skill that would take most people trial and error and effort, even with the book. Now, I'm not saying he mastered skills this way, but like his plaster work, he showed the other guys how to do plaster work. There's no reference of any plaster work in his history. Now, it's possible in one of his prison stints he may have worked with plaster, but we don't know. Right? The paper mache busts, the masks, the fake heads. He learned that from a craft book in the library. Almost everything he did came out of that library. Borderline genius, son. Brilliant individual.
Folded during his incarceration at Alcatraz. Morris's journey through the criminal justice system took him to various correctional facilities in Florida and Georgia, each chapter marked by his continued involvement in illicit activities. However, his most audacious move came when he successfully escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary while serving a 10-year sentence for bank robbery. This daring escape marked a turning point in his criminal career, gaining him notoriety among law enforcement agencies. Despite his brief taste of freedom, Frank Lee Morris couldn't elude the long arm of the law for long. Approximately a year after his escape, he was recaptured while in the midst of committing a burglary. This time, there would be no escape, as he was subsequently sent to the infamous Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. On January 20th, 1960, Frank Lee Morris became inmate number AZ 1441 at Alcatraz. Little did anyone know that this chapter in his life would culminate in one of the most audacious and mysterious escape attempts in the history of American prisons. Next, we have John and Clarence Anglin. John and Clarence Anglin were two brothers whose unbreakable bond formed during their early years. They were known to be extraordinary swimmers, and they had a fearless nature. One time, they ventured into the frigid waters of Lake Michigan, even when chunks of ice still floated on the surface. This daring feat amazed their siblings and spoke volumes about their adventurous spirits. As the years went by, the Anglin brothers' lives took a criminal turn.
Do you swim in cold water?
Do I swim in cold water? Well, yeah. I mean, pools are usually cold.
I mean, like with ice in it?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. That might be why I'm a Sasquatch. Particularly a Caucasian one. Because I'm one of those weirdos that, like, if I go to a hotel or whatever and the pool's open and it's a quote-unquote heated pool, but it's snowing, it's not heated, really. I'll go swimming anyway, because why not?
Yeah, no, not me.
Some people, I guess. Wife always called me a polar bear.
It all began when Clarence, at the tender age of 14, was caught breaking into a service station. This marked the beginning of their illicit activities. By the early 1950s, they had teamed up as partners in crime, often targeting establishments that were closed to ensure that no one would be harmed during their heists. Interestingly, they claimed to have used a weapon only once, and that even that time, they used a toy gun during a bank robbery.
I'm getting the impression this guy's on the prisoner's side. They were just misunderstood.
Yeah.
I'm sure they were robbing that 7-Eleven just for bread and milk.
1958, the brothers executed a successful heist at the Bank of Columbia in Columbia, Alabama. This act of robbery resulted in their convictions and subsequent sentencing. The judicial system imposed 35-year sentences on them, setting them on a path that would lead them through a series of prisons. Over the years, John and Clarence experienced life behind bars at different institutions. They served time in various penitentiaries, including Florida State Prison, Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, and the Atlanta Penitentiary. However, their insatiable desire for freedom led them to make multiple attempts to escape from the confines of the Atlanta facility. These repeated efforts caught the authorities' attention and ultimately led to their transfer to the infamous Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. John Anglin arrived at Alcatraz on October 24, 1960, bearing the designation Inmate AZ 1476. Not long after, his brother Clarence joined him on January 16, 1961, taking on the identification of Inmate AZ 1485. The last person is Alan West. He was born in New York City. One significant event in West's criminal history occurred in 1955 when he was arrested for car theft. Following this conviction, he was initially incarcerated at Atlanta Penitentiary, which was known for its high security measures and its role in housing some of the country's most notorious criminals.
bro, for
criminals.
years.
However, Alan
Oops.
West's time in prison
Oops. Did I break it? Is it broken? For years, there was a YouTube channel where this guy who ended up with like well over 1 million subs, all he did was sit around in a frozen bathtub full of ice in this creek and drink vodka. That was it. He just hung out in a frozen bathtub in a frozen creek. He'd go out, break the ice, grab a bottle of vodka, plop down in it, start drinking and streaming. It was his entire content for his channel. And it did very, very well. It upset some people that it did so well. But yeah, there are groups of people all around the Northern Hemisphere who call themselves polar bear clubs. And they go diving in cold conditions. Not always frozen, but they go diving whenever the hell they get ready to go diving is what they do.
was marked by repeated attempts to break free. His escape attempt from the Florida State Prison, where he was serving time for car theft, drew the attention of prison authorities. Due to his history of escape attempts and the threat he posed as a serial offender, West was transferred to Alcatraz in 1957 at the relatively young age of 28. Upon his arrival at Alcatraz, West was assigned the inmate number AZ-1335, joining a select group of...
I could try to explain what it is, but okay, so he has the most beautiful man on the internet. He has a hijabi wearing Muslim gamer conservative girl. I can't even say that without giggling. It seems to be that seems to be what she is. It seems to check out. A very, very young, very infant fellow who brings in a bit of the millennial slash what is the new Gen Z or Gen Y or what Gen XYZ? I don't know what the new, but it's that one, that new one that they talk about sometimes. And he unfortunately catches the raw end of the stick on most cases because he hasn't been on a construction crew before, so he's not really prepared. Who am I missing? I'm missing Lawrence Knight. I have no idea what he does. I don't know. And then there's Joker's Voice, who he does comic and movie review news type stuff, more or less current events type stuff for entertainment. He's like ETV for like nobody. You just want to know what's going on in entertainment. He's a good one to.
Just go check him out.
Did I miss everybody? Did I miss anybody, Sam? Tell me if I missed somebody, because I want to smoke them up too.
Inmates who had found themselves on the remote and infamous island prison. Alcatraz was
Legion
known
talks.
for its formidable
Specimen
security
himself.
measures, which included
What's up,
heavily
Todd?
fortified cells, vigilant guards, and its location in the middle of
Stick
the
around, you'll
treacherous
find out what
waters
a
of
nice
San
beetle
Francisco
is.
Bay. The prison's reputation as a virtually escape-proof facility added an extra layer of intrigue to the story of any inmate who attempted to break free: the escape. These four inmates had a history with each other, having crossed paths during previous incarcerations in Florida and Georgia. When they found themselves assigned to adjacent cells at Alcatraz in December 1961, they saw an opportunity to join forces and hatch an audacious escape plan. Frank Morris, with his intelligence and leadership skills, took charge of orchestrating the elaborate scheme. Their plan involved strategically widening the ventilation ducts located beneath their sinks. To do this, they ingeniously repurposed discarded saw blades they scavenged from the prison grounds, as well as metal spoons stolen from the prison mess hall. Their most remarkable feat was the creation of an electric drill, improvised from the motor of a vacuum cleaner. This resourcefulness allowed them to make the necessary alterations without raising suspicion. They hid their work with painted cardboard and drowned out any noise with Morris's accordion playing during the designated music hour, camouflaging the sounds of their digging. Once the holes were big enough, the inmates could access an unguarded utility corridor situated directly behind the tier of their cells. From there, they climbed to the...
All right. So what you want to bet they also told stories about the ghost in the walls?
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, wouldn't you, if you knew there was a chance that noises could be heard in places there shouldn't be people, I would immediately start a story about ghosts. Man, I saw it. I seen it. He went right through the wall into the crawl space.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody be telling about their ghost stories. Nobody be questioning noises that they hear. Because they're not crazy, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's the way that works. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
The vacant upper level of the cell block, which became the clandestine workshop where their escape plan took shape. Here, they relied on more than 50 raincoats, along with additional stolen and donated materials, to fashion life preservers. Remarkably, Morris had come across a design for these life preservers in the March 1962
Oh yeah, Know Me
issue of
Without
Popular
You. That's right.
Mechanics, providing them with valuable instructions on construction. This workshop on
I don't know
top
what
of the
she does
prison
either,
blocks
so
became the
that's
epicenter
probably
of their
why.
operations. It was here that they crafted the life preservers, ensuring they would float and support their weight in the frigid waters surrounding Alcatraz Island. As they worked, they carefully concealed their activities and materials, guarding against the ever-watchful eyes of the prison guards. He also learned how to make a lampshade using resin from the November 1960 issue of Popular Mechanics. He also found valuable insights about navigation aids, specifically channel buoys, in the May 21st, 1962 issue of Sports Illustrated. Undeterred by their confined environment, the group of escapees managed to construct a sizable rubber raft measuring 6 feet by 14 feet. They stitched the raft's seams by hand and sealed them using liquid plastic they got from the prison's workshops. Making use of nearby steam pipes, they harnessed the heat to facilitate the sealing process. To fashion paddles, they improvised with available materials, fashioning sturdy tools using plywood and screws. Achieving access to the rooftop, a crucial component of their escape plan, involved scaling a ventilation shaft and dismantling a large fan secured by rivets. Their escape plan didn't involve only physical preparations, but also meticulous attention to detail. They knew that covering their activities outside their cells and concealing their escape would be crucial, so they had to make sure that their plan wouldn't be exposed before they complete their escape. So they made some dummy heads to mimic their presence during head counts and patrols. These lifelike heads were fashioned from an inventive concoction that resembled paper mache, made by combining soap, toothpaste, concrete dust, and toilet paper. The finishing touches were added with paint sourced from the maintenance shop and hair collected from the barbershop floor. By artfully arranging towels and clothing beneath their blankets and placing the fabricated heads on their pillows, they ensured that from a distance it would appear as if they were sound asleep in their bunks. So they eagerly waited for the night of their escape on June 11, 1962. Yet even with their careful preparations, unforeseen challenges arose. Alan West encountered an unexpected obstacle in the form of hardened cement around his vent. This accidental complication narrowed the opening and firmly locked the grill in place. His efforts to rectify the situation were in vain, and by the time he managed to free the vent and widen the hole, his companions were already on their way out without him. Left with no choice, he had to return to his cell, resigned to missing out on the opportunity for freedom. After successfully maneuvering through the service corridor, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers progressed to the next critical phase of their escape plan. With a combination of careful planning and audacity, they navigated the ventilation shaft, eventually emerging on the prison's rooftop. During this ascent, an unexpected loud crash echoed through the confined space. This crash alerted some of the guards. However, as no further unusual sounds followed and the cause of the disturbance wasn't immediately apparent.
Ghosts, man. I would have had that whole place haunted the fuck out. There'd be haints everywhere. I'd be convincing people. I'd be telling them stories. I'm good at telling stories. The children love stories.
They weren't unnoticed. Equipped with their makeshift tools and a sense of urgency, the escapees descended a significant height of 50 feet by sliding down a kitchen vent pipe. This risky descent demonstrated their resourcefulness and determination. Once they reached the ground, they were faced with a formidable challenge. Not one, but two 12-foot-high barbed wire perimeter fences stood between them and freedom. In an astonishing feat of determination and skill, they managed to overcome these obstacles and find themselves at the northeast shoreline of Alcatraz. This location proved to be a stroke of tactical brilliance, as it was situated near the power plant and thus lay within a blind spot in the prison's comprehensive security system. Shielded from the vigilant gaze of searchlights and the watchful eyes in the gun towers, they seized this opportunity to proceed with their escape plan. It was in this hidden corner that they put their preparations to the test. Using a stolen concertina, a musical instrument that looks like an accordion, ingeniously modified to serve as a makeshift bellows, they efficiently inflated the raft they had meticulously crafted. Their attention to detail and adaptability showcased their determination to succeed against all odds. As the night wore on, sometime after 10 p.m., the trio of escapees embarked on the final phase of their plan. They boarded the raft they had worked so diligently to create, launching it into the cold, dark waters surrounding Alcatraz. Their objective lay ahead, to get to Angel Island, located approximately 2 miles to the north. With each stroke of their improvised paddles they had fashioned from plywood and screws, they kept propelling themselves further away away from the prison walls that had confined them for so long. As the lights of Alcatraz faded into the distance, their journey into the unknown began, an audacious bid for freedom that would capture the imagination of the world and become an enduring symbol of both determination and defiance. Now, since then, there's been lots of theories on whether or not they made it out alive. Many military and law enforcement agencies spent 10 days searching by air, sea, and land after the 3 inmates escaped from Alcatraz prison. They found a paddle and a wallet with information about the escapees' friends and family near Angel Island. Some scraps of what seemed to be the escape raft were discovered near the Golden Gate Bridge. A deflated life jacket from the same raft was also found near Alcatraz Island. However, no other evidence was found. The FBI believed early on that the escapees had drowned because they left their personal belongings behind, but they couldn't find any human remains at the time. A month later, a ship spotted a body in the ocean near the Golden Gate Bridge. They didn't recover the body until later and didn't report it until October. However, the local county coroner, Henry Turkle, doubted it was one of the escapees, thinking it was more likely someone else who had jumped from the bridge. Other coroners disagreed, suggesting it could be one of the escapees. The FBI officially said it was possible for the escapees to reach Angel Island, but the chances of surviving the rough waters were very low. Also, according to the final FBI report, the escapees had plans to steal clothes in a car once they reached land, but there were no reports of such thefts in the area. While there are many facts that suggest that they might have died, one thing that we know for sure is that their bodies were never found. The most interesting theory about what happened to them was that they made it out alive because they had help from a very powerful ally, the real mastermind. According to this theory, their ally and the real mastermind behind the whole escape is none other than Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson led a life filled with both challenges and notoriety. He got his unique nickname Bumpy because he had an abnormal growth on his head, and this served as an emblem of his identity. Bumpy's early years were filled with troubles. At the tender age of 10, after his older brother was wanted for the murder of a white man, he, along with most of his siblings, was sent to live in the bustling streets of Harlem for their safety. Escaping the racial strife of the South, where they faced discrimination and violence, seemed like a fresh start for the Johnson family. However, even in the vibrant and dynamic neighborhood of Harlem, Bumpy couldn't escape the scourge of racism. His small stature and deep Southern accent made him an easy target for bullies. Nevertheless, his fiery temper and determination to stand his ground prevented him from becoming a hapless victim. It was during these early years that he began honing his fighting skills, learning how to defend himself in the unforgiving streets of Harlem. Education didn't play a significant role in Bumpy's life. He dropped out of high school early on. Instead, he turned to odd jobs to make ends meet and fell into the orbit of a rather unsavory crowd. This association eventually brought him to the attention of a notorious gangster named William Bub Hewlett. Under Hewlett's guidance, Bumpy became more than just a street fighter. He evolved into a highly regarded bodyguard, protecting the interests of high-rolling illegal gamblers in the bustling neighborhood of Harlem. Bumpy's journey took a darker turn when his involvement in various illegal activities, including burglary and pimping, led him down a treacherous path. These illicit ventures eventually caught the attention of law enforcement, resulting in his incarceration for the next decade. While behind bars, Bumpy continued to cultivate his criminal skills and connections, solidifying his status as a significant figure in the world of organized crime. By the time Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson reached the age of 30, he had already spent half of his life in and out of prison. His reputation as a troublemaker was well earned, as he was deeply involved in various criminal activities, including bribery, theft, and running a pimping operation. When he was finally released from prison in 1932, after serving a lengthy sentence, he found himself in a dire situation, broke and without any legitimate job prospects. Returning to the unforgiving streets of Harlem, Bumpy's life took a dramatic turn when he crossed paths with one of the most powerful figures in the Harlem underworld, Stephanie St. Clair, known as Madam Queen, or the Queen of the Policy.
I say next show that I don't got a guest for, we're gonna take a look at Miss Queen over here. I bet she's got a story to tell. I bet somebody's told it too. Hello, Tales Told in the Dark. Welcome in, darling. It's good to see you.
Rackets. St. Clair was a formidable force in the world of organized crime in New York City. St. Clair recognized something in Bumpy Johnson, a potential she could harness. She took him under her wing, seeing his potential as a loyal and resourceful ally in her criminal endeavors. Their partnership marked a significant turning point in Bumpy's life. Together, Bumpy Johnson and Stephanie St. Clair embarked on a bold and audacious mission. They waged a war against several influential New York crime bosses, with one of their primary targets being the notorious Dutch Schultz. This was was a period when organized crime families held considerable power and influence over various illegal enterprises, including gambling, protection rackets, and the numbers game. Serving as St. Clair's bodyguard and chief enforcer, Johnson was involved in the murder and kidnapping of over 40 people, but the duo's war against the mob was futile. At that time, Dutch Schultz and his associates had a firm grip on the illegal gambling operations in Harlem, thanks in part to their favorable relations with law enforcement. However, Schultz's unscrupulous financial practices and a growing sense of mistrust among his mob associates spelled trouble for him. This internal strife would ultimately lead to his demise, as he was brutally shot to death in 1935. Simultaneously, Stephanie St. Clair, facing mounting legal pressure and the need to evade law enforcement, made a strategic decision to entrust her illicit empire to Bumpy Johnson. With Schultz no longer in the picture, Johnson and Charles Lucky Luciano, who had been staunch rivals, surprisingly forged an alliance. In this newfound partnership, Johnson was granted control over all of Harlem's underworld operations as an independent entity, with the understanding that Luciano's syndicate, which would later become known as the Genovese crime family, would receive a share of the proceeds. Bumpy Johnson's influence in Harlem was complex. While the community often lived in fear of his criminal activities, there was also a deep sense of admiration and respect for him. He earned a reputation similar to that of a modern-day Robin Hood. Despite his involvement in illegal activities, Johnson showed a softer side by supporting the most vulnerable members of Harlem. One notable example of his goodwill was his tradition of giving away free turkeys during Thanksgiving to families in need. This act of charity endeared him to many residents, who saw him as a protector of the community. Bumpy Johnson's life took a dramatic turn in 1951, when he received a 15-year prison sentence for his involvement in a heroin distribution conspiracy in New York. He spent the majority of his sentence at the notorious Alcatraz prison. His stay on the Rock, as Alcatraz was often called, was a challenging period in his life, and it tested his resilience and resourcefulness. While incarcerated at Alcatraz, Johnson's legend continued to grow, and intriguing stories surrounded his time there. One of the lesser-known tales was his alleged involvement in the daring escape attempt of the 3 Alcatraz escapees. Although this story is not officially confirmed, it's worth noting that Clarence Carnes, another notorious Alcatraz inmate, claimed in interviews that Bumpy Johnson may have assisted the Anglin brothers during their infamous 1962 escape from the prison. According to Carnes, Bumpy provided the boat that the Anglin brothers, along with fellow escapee Frank Morris, used to make their daring getaway from the seemingly impenetrable island prison. This involvement in the escape attempt aligns with Bumpy Johnson's reputation for being a
gang ladies night. That's right.
Throughout his life, he had a history of offering security and support to those who sought refuge or faced threats. One example of this is how he protected Malcolm X, notably in the television series The Godfather of Harlem. When he came out of Alcatraz, he reunited with Malcolm X, who was an old friend. This scene has led many to wonder if the two were really friends in real life. Well, in reality, Bumpy Johnson and Malcolm X were indeed friends. Johnson provided security for Malcolm X during times when his life was in jeopardy. While the exact extent of their friendship may not be extensively detailed in Malcolm X's biography, their collaboration in the struggle for civil rights and social justice in the United States was well documented. Bumpy Johnson and Malcolm X shared a commitment to fighting for equity and equality during a tumultuous era in American history. Interestingly, Malcolm X died after leaving his protection, so it is very possible that Bumpy was the real mastermind behind the Alcatraz escape, because he certainly had the means to help the escapees disappear without leaving a trace. The aftermath. Allen West was the only member of the escape plan who didn't actually take part in the escape itself. Following the failure of the Alcatraz escape plan, West made a significant decision. He decided to fully cooperate with the subsequent investigation. This cooperation led to West avoiding any criminal charges related to the escape plot, distinguishing him from his comrades who faced legal consequences for their roles in the audacious breakout attempt. After the closure of Alcatraz in 1963, West was among the inmates who were transferred to other federal prisons. He first found himself incarcerated at McNeil Island, located off the coast of Washington. Later, he was moved back to the Atlanta Penitentiary, where he continued to serve his sentence. Despite having avoided charges for his involvement in the Alcatraz escape, he found himself in legal trouble once again. In 1967, just a few years after his release from Alcatraz, West was arrested in Florida on charges of grand larceny. This marked another chapter in his troubled history with the law. Tragically, while serving his sentence in the Florida State Prison, a deeply unfortunate and disturbing incident occurred. In October 1972, West was involved in a fatal altercation, resulting in the stabbing death of another inmate. The motives behind this incident were unclear, but it was suggested that it may have been motivated by racial animosity. Following this tragic event, Allen West faced multiple sentences, including a life imprisonment term for the murder conviction. His time in prison came to a somber end. In 1978, he passed away due to acute peritonitis. The Alcatraz escape certainly gave some other inmates motivation to recreate.
I'm not actually a comedian. I just play one on YouTube, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so maybe that's what you're thinking.
Instance, on December 1962, an Alcatraz inmate named John Paul Scott devised a plan. He fashioned water wings using inflated rubber gloves and then bravely swam a distance of 2.7 nautical miles, which is about 3.1 miles or 5.0 kilometers from Alcatraz to Fort Point, which is located at the southern end of the Golden Gate Bridge. On that fateful day at precisely 5:47 a.m., the authorities at Alcatraz realized that an escape attempt was in progress. John Paul Scott, determined to make his way out of the inescapable Alcatraz, had taken the plunge into the cold and treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay. However, this escape attempt would not go as planned. Shortly after his daring escape, Scott encountered a significant setback. During his desperate bid for freedom, he had the misfortune of breaking his ankle. This injury severely hampered his ability to continue the escape. Realizing the dire situation he was in and the immense pain from his broken ankle, Scott had no choice but to give up the escape. Just 20 minutes after the initial alarm was raised, he was recaptured. The capture took place on a small rock formation known as Little Alcatraz, located a mere 100 yards from Alcatraz Island itself. Interestingly, while Scott's escape attempt may have been short-lived, it did manage to evade the initial search efforts conducted by the Coast Guard in the bay. Scott had managed to stay hidden from view. This escape attempt had momentarily left authorities baffled and wondering about his whereabouts. At 7:40 a.m., the Presidio Military Police received an unexpected call from a group of 4 teenagers. They had stumbled upon an unconscious man beneath the imposing structure of the Golden Gate Bridge at a place known as Fort Point. To their surprise, this man turned out to be none other than John Paul Scott. Scott's condition was dire. He was suffering from a severe case of hypothermia brought on by the frigid waters and the exhausting ordeal he had endured. It appeared that the ebbing tide had carried him a considerable distance from Alcatraz to this location, approximately 3 miles away. After being discovered and rescued by the teenagers, John Paul Scott was quickly transported to Letterman General Hospital, where he received treatment and care for his injuries and hypothermia. Once his physical condition stabilized, he was promptly returned to the confines of Alcatraz, where the reality of its inescapable reputation once again came undeniable.
Maybe one day we'll sit down and have us a big old long conversation about White Boy Rick. Then we'll talk about what the CIA and the DEA are willing to do with people.
Before John Paul Scott's daring escape attempt, everyone thought that swimming away from Alcatraz was a near impossible feat. The formidable challenges presented by the San Francisco Bay made this notion seem entirely plausible. For starters, the bay's water temperature in December, when Scott made his attempt, was around a bone-chilling 53 degree F, 12 degrees C. This frigid water alone posed a significant threat to anyone attempting such an escape. Compounding this challenge were the powerful and unpredictable currents in the bay, which could exceed speeds of 6 knots. These currents could swiftly carry a swimmer away from their intended course, making navigation incredibly difficult. Furthermore, Alcatraz...
And then you have a Care Bear stare. Wait, let me see if I can do it. That's what I'm saying. I don't know. He's got a fantastic laugh. That man's laugh is like a 4 on the Richter scale. I just want to get him on the show so that we can both talk. Won't be a dry panty anywhere in the room.
As was surrounded by treacherous waters dotted with razor-sharp rocks lurking just beneath the surface. These jagged underwater formations posed a grave danger to anyone attempting to swim away from the island. Adding to the already daunting environment were occasional visits from great white sharks, known inhabitants of the bay. While shark attacks on humans were relatively rare, the mere possibility of encountering these ape...
Wait, what is it? You say, what is it? In a world where a man was filming the police officers. Right? Maniacal laugh is maniacal. Oh, come on, man. Like, everybody needs a good villain laugh. And I've got 2. And then there's the which to me is a little bit creepier because it sounds kind of like the Cowardly Lion.
Mm-hmm.
apex predators added another layer of terror to the idea of swimming to freedom. Prison officers, well aware of these formidable natural barriers, used them to discourage inmates from attempting escapes. When Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had escaped from Alcatraz 6 months before John Paul Scott's
I'm sorry,
attempt,
I failed to
prison
say his
officials had
name. Hold
initially
on, let me say his name. So, Lawless World TV. That's Lawless World TV on one. Lawless World TV. Yes. Yes. No. Yes.
Yes.
Lawless World TV on one. Thank you.
presumed that the trio had met their demise in the icy waters of the bay. Although the FBI officially listed them as missing, the prevailing belief was that they had likely drowned. However, John Paul Scott's escape challenged this notion. For the first time, it was proven that a determined inmate could, under specific circumstances, temporarily escape from Alcatraz by swimming. This event challenged the widely held belief that the seemingly insurmountable challenges posed by the San Francisco Bay made escape by swimming virtually impossible. Now, the most interesting story is the fact that someone claiming to be John Anglin wrote to San Francisco.
It's a real girl. Noise. I didn't know that. I thought you were a short Asian fella in Southeast Asia. It's the internet. Everybody's anyway, it doesn't matter.
Police in 2013. In the letter, the writer identified themselves as John Anglin and claimed to have escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962.
Yeah, I sent him.
Brothers John and
I sent Lawless World TV an email, and I actually typed it out like this to start with. It had the link to the StreamYard and told him that I was going to bring a white girl with daddy issues, and then I deleted that. It just said. I was like, that might be a bit much. I should at least talk to you about it first. That's when I typed it out, and I did stop and read what I had written. It went, wait, no, that's not. That's not good.
Clarence Anglin, inmate Frank Morris. The writer stated that all of them had successfully escaped that night, but just barely. My name is John Anglin, reads the letter. I escaped from Alcatraz in 1962. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. According to this mysterious letter, Clarence Anglin had passed away in 2008, and Frank Morris had died in 2005. The author of the letter made an unusual proposal to the authorities, suggesting that if they were promised a maximum of 1 year in jail and access to medical treatment, they would reveal their current whereabouts. They claimed to be 83 years old and suffering from cancer at the time. The letter mentioned that John Anglin had spent most of his life in Seattle and had spent 8 years in North Dakota. At the time the letter was sent, the writer was supposedly residing in Southern California. Do you think this letter is genuine? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video...
What do you think? You think that was the dude and the man himself?
I don't know.
Well, let me tell you, if there was a person that was capable of pulling that off, it might have been Morris, because he was a very methodical individual, a complete nut job and a total freaking psychopath, but very methodical. He took things step by step, and he completed each step completely before he moved to the next one. And that's important when executing a plan. I mean, you can't elbow Jenkins everything. I know it's real fun to run off and elbow Jenkins some shit, but it don't work. Sometimes that's not part of the plan. Didn't work for Elbow Jenkins. All right, so the moment most of us have been waiting for, the crazy ice beetles. Now, we're not going to watch this whole thing because it's like 30 minutes long, but I want you to get the idea of what this is about.
In the freezing alien environments of Antarctica, humans have been driven to develop some of the largest, toughest, and most advanced machines ever conceived to survive the plunging temperatures and extreme isolation. When the Soviets arrived in the 1950s, they took with them the huge Kharkovchankas, colossal, tracked mobile bases that could house entire teams of explorers as they plowed through the Antarctic interior. For the Americans, it was the overwhelming force of their advanced aerial logistics that allowed them to transport millions of tons of equipment into the very heart of the continent itself. And over the decades, various nations and expeditions have spent millions developing reliable and powerful technology built with one thing in mind: surviving in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. And then there's the Australians, who chose, well, this.
Bingo! Ice beetles.
while it might seem a little bit crazy, in the 1960s, the Australian Antarctic Service took with them a series of air-cooled two-wheel drive Volkswagen Beetles for use down in Antarctica. And it's a story that's always fascinated me, not just because of the ridiculousness of the choice of vehicle to take to some of the most hostile environments on Earth, but the question that has taken me so long to finally answer is just how many of these Beetles actually made it down to Antarctica? How did they?
All right, so let's relook at this situation. He's like, this is a weird choice, but if you back up and think about it, as long as the temperatures don't get so cold that it actually freezes the oil or actually freezes solid the fuel, that VW Beetle you can turn the key or cracks the battery. It gets so cold. As long as you got a spark to turn it over one good time and throw fire to the cylinder, that thing will crank up. And right after it cranks up, it's at operating temperature almost immediately. Forever. It doesn't care how cold it gets. To a point, there is this magical point where gasoline turns to sort of a slush. And when it gets to that slushy state, I believe you would have to add a glow plug just to liquefy the fuel before it goes into the cylinder, I imagine. That'd be my guess.
They fare down in the frozen continent, and perhaps the most compelling mystery of all, what happened to all the Antarctic beetles?
Hi, Callum. How you doing?
Oh, look at that. So this is the beetle.
It sure is.
It's a truly fascinating story that led me down so many different rabbit holes, and I couldn't have done it without help from today's sponsor, which is Storyblocks. See, I've used Storyblocks for ages now, and whenever people ask me how I achieve a certain look or an edit or a style in one of my videos or documentaries, I usually have the same answer for them. It's thanks to Storyblocks. Storyblocks is a stock media subscription service with a simply massive library of stock footage, photos, music, sound effects, even tiny little things like film effects and backgrounds and Premiere templates that I can download and drag and drop straight into my project. As you can probably see, each one of my videos now uses hundreds of assets from Storyblocks. The best thing of all is you pay one price. You either pay monthly or yearly.
Like I said, air-cooled. Those damn things were originally designed as like a scaled-down helicopter engine. What's not to love, man? You can just tune them fuckers to run at whatever temperature you want. They're unbelievably diverse and capable of all kinds. And that rear-wheel drive has the engine sitting directly on it. There's virtually no loss to power. It might only have 68 horsepower, but that's 43 horsepower more than it needs. So, like, it'll go anywhere. They float. They freaking float, dude. Is it
Antarctic exploration, having established some of the first expeditions and research bases on the continent as early as 1911. By the 1960s, long-range expeditions, which had traditionally been powered by dog sleds and manpower alone, had since given way to increasingly larger tracked vehicles, such as the early Caterpillar tractors or World War II-era M29 Weasels. But more conventional vehicles, such as wheeled tractors or even motorbikes, were often employed for shorter-range work and transport in and around bases. In 1963, Ray McMahon was sitting in the Melbourne head office of the Australian National Antarctic Research Expeditions, or ANARE. Ray was due to become the new station leader at Mawson Station, one of ANARE's largest and oldest stations, located in MacRobertson Land on the Antarctic coast. Poring over the lists of vehicles and equipment already at Mawson, Ray saw the potential of a small, simple transport vehicle, larger than a motorbike, but smaller and more nimble than the current tractors and trucks that were being used. Something simple, light, and readily available. Something like a Beetle.
Ice Beetle.
By the 1960s, the Volkswagen Beetles' revolutionary design and monumental levels of production had made it an established presence on roads around the world. Robust, reliable, and efficient, the Beetle had proven itself in everything from dirt tracks to new and shiny highways. But VW's marketing division was in the midst of a campaign to convince potential customers of its prowess in another environment: snow and ice.
Have you ever wondered how the man who drives a snowplow drives to the snowplow? This one drives a Volkswagen. So you can stop wondering,
With its rear-mounted engine, lightweight construction, and thin-profile tires that cut through the snow, Beetles excelled in snowy conditions where other vehicles, especially heavy front-engine cars of the time, floundered. As such, by 1962, Volkswagen was advising their dealers worldwide to look for ways to prove the small car's standout ability in sub-zero temperatures. Reading this memo in the head office of Volkswagen Australia was a young marketing officer named Graham Massingham. Graham realised he needed to find a grand gesture, a promotion that could further establish the Beetle as being able to perform in all forms of winter weather, even in the toughest snowy conditions. And no sooner did the phone ring.
And I said, the name's McMahon. I'm going to the Antarctic shortly. Is there any chance of you giving me a Volkswagen? Deathly silence on the phone. Excuse me, is anybody there? Yes, the voice said, we need to meet immediately.
And so, with that fateful phone call, Ray had managed to broker the perfect partnership for both Volkswagen and for Anare, who would receive a brand new 1963 model year Beetle for free that they could use down in their base at Mawson Station. However, for Volkswagen, it was the chance to prove said Beetle's abilities in some of the toughest, most challenging environments on Earth, and then hopefully promote that success through their marketing materials. Now, it was up to Ray to actually choose the Beetle that would go down south with them and to choose the colour of the Beetle. He ended up choosing this beautiful ruby red that would stand out well against the snow and also blend in with the other cars and equipment that were in use down at Mawson at the time. But after that, it was a case of handing it over to the Volkswagen engineers who would prepare this car for service. And you would be amazed how little was done to this stock Beetle to prepare it for service down in Antarctica. Essentially, all that the Volkswagen engineers did was put this through the same winterizing process that any Beetle sold in colder climates and markets would have gone through before sale. Now, obviously, this was something that was almost unheard of in the Australian market, but most of them were small changes, and most of the stuff on the exterior was purely visual changes. For one, there was the Anare crest that was applied to each of the doors. At the front, there was the very distinctive Antarctica 1 plates that was put on the front bumper and on the rear. And then on the top here, you had the factory-fitted luggage rack, and this was bolted to the roof, and it was later used quite a lot to carry luggage that wouldn't ordinarily fit inside the cabin. At the back, there was a tow bar that was fitted, and to the underside, there was a sump guard.
What's up, sweet mate? Good to see you, Tow for
But
life.
pretty much everything else was stock. Even the front tires were stock. Only at the back did they apply Dunlop winter treads, although they did supply snow chains for all four corners should they need them as well too. Most of the actual winterizing process happened in the engine bay, and most of the changes were also pretty small. There was asbestos insulation wrapped around the exhaust manifold for better heat retention. The engine itself was rebuilt with stronger crankshaft bearings that were designed for colder temperatures, and it was also given winter oil, although the winter grade oil that they put into the engine was actually still too thick by the time it got to Antarctica and started working. They had to put an even thinner oil inside this engine, and apparently the Beetle ran it without complaint. Now, on the interior of the car, very little actually changed. They put an ammeter and an oil pressure gauge onto the dashboard, and under the rear seat where the battery was, they removed the standard 6-volt battery and put two heavy-duty 6-volt batteries wired in series. So this means that you would get 12 volts of power running through the 6-volt starter and giving a bit more of a boost when starting it from cold. But other than that, it was a remarkably stock vehicle. The only custom thing designed specifically for Antarctica, I suppose, was the blanking plate. There was a blanking plate designed that could fit over and clip onto the air intake. And that was just so that the fine powdered snow couldn't blow into the air intake and fill up the engine bay. But of course, this was the point. Volkswagen wanted to prove this Beetle's ability essentially as a stock car down there in Antarctica. And, well, they were soon going to find out how well it actually worked. With the car...
So here's my question. They said they used a winterized oil in the crankcase, but when they got there, it was too solid, so they had to use a thinner oil. What was the thinner oil is my question. Were they using whale blubber? Like, are you using ambergris? Are we talking watch oil over here, 3-in-1? Like, what are we using?
Are now ready for its Antarctic adventure. It was packed along with a generous helping of spare parts onto the outgoing Nella Dan at Port Melbourne, and along with Ray, his new crew, and the innumerable supplies and equipment needed for the 1963 season at Mawson Station. Arriving at Mawson Station at MacRobertson Land in January 1963, the crews on shore watching as the Nella Dan arrived must have stared in disbelief as one of the first items lifted from the deck of their relief vessel was a ruby red Volkswagen Beetle. After being pulled ashore and fueled up, the first major test of the
happening.
Beetle would be on a
We're doing
Rumfield
that
base's
thing.
airstrip,
You're
a
here,
patch of cleared
so
runway under
it's
the
that much
nearby
better.
Rumdoodle Peak. Despite the steep slopes and thick snow around Mawson and a crowd of very doubtful onlookers,
I don't
the
know.
newly arrived Beetle managed to complete the 35-kilometer round trip in just over an hour, a near record at the time. As part of their agreement with Volkswagen, Jeff Merrill, and Addy's official photographer, then captured a variety of beautiful shots highlighting the Beetle in action, racing across vast expanses of snow and ice, flanked by the expedition's Porsche engine snow tracks and
Hey,
loaded up with
Sunshine,
supplies.
will
This,
you
along with
drop Ardent's link? He's a previous guest on Sasquatch Shills. But he lost his mod status because he didn't show up for like 3 months, dude. Where your shiny, lovely, beautiful bald head been at, dude? What you been doing? Let me try it this way. What are you at, bye? He'll understand that.
the reels of film footage was then packaged up and sent back home to Australia on board the departing Nella Dan, where it was destined to become a media sensation and a marketing coup for Volkswagen Australia.
Mr. McMahon reported that the vehicle's performance had been excellent and that the ice slopes and crevassed hills had been encountered without difficulty. Since this film was taken and brought back on the Nella Dan, cabled reports have told of trouble-free motoring on a number of assignments.
So just a fun little aside on the marketing aspect of this. Here is an original clipping from a magazine at the time demonstrating the Volkswagen's abilities. Volkswagen was famous for doing these really distinctive, really imaginative adverts, especially for the Beetle. And they often had this, very striking photo. They then had a kind of catchy headline and then this lovely description underneath it. And you can find lots of different examples. But this one has Antarctica one. I mean, you got the number plate right there. You got the driver waving out of the car. And then you got the Antarctic mountains in the background. It's just such a perfect photo.
Oh, thank you,
and then it says down here,
Strange.
the first car at the bottom of the world. Now, that's not actually true. The first car that made it to the bottom of the world was an Arrol Johnson, I believe. And this would have been in 1908. And that's what Shackleton took down with him during the Nimrod expedition. But we'll let Volkswagen have a...
When you get you a couple of hours that you ain't busy, hit me up. We'll do us an update. You can just sit around and tell us every little thing.
Pass for that. But there's some nice, interesting bits of information in the description here. The Australian National Research Expedition really had no choice. They wanted a car that, quote, any member of the party could hop into and drive off without a moment's hesitation. And the Volkswagen just happened to fit the bill. Things got so fierce that one man said, now we'll know what it's like when hell freezes over. So if it ever does, you'll know what
there
car
he is.
to buy.
Makes
What amazing write-up. I mean, it tells you everything you need to know. And something else that's quite interesting here, it says another reason that the Volkswagen went where even the dog wouldn't go is its sealed bottom. This is something that the Beetle was often advertised in. There's a very famous advert where they drive a Volkswagen Beetle into a loch and it basically floats there because the entire body was essentially airtight and it could float in water for a certain amount of time. This obviously very advantageous for when you're dealing with fine powdered snow. That's one of the reasons they had that blanking plate over the air intake so that nothing could drive into it. But what an amazing triumph of marketing for Volkswagen to get this Beetle down there, to have it work, and then to be able to use it for this sort of advertisement. And, Beetles were famous for their go anywhere, do anything ability. Things like this, exploits like this, only help to reinforce that.
The men at Mawson are delighted with the new addition, and Volkswagen is proud to be associated with the vital work being carried out by the Australian National
whatever it takes, brother, whatever it
and
takes.
confident too that the inimitable Beetle will prove as indefatigable in Antarctica as 6 millions of its brothers have proved on the other great continents of the world.
The Beetle's abilities in the snow and ice had quickly exceeded expectations. Scientists on the base loved the simplicity and ease of use, lovingly dubbing the car the Red Terror and frequently using it on short expeditions onto the sea ice around the base. As Ray laid out in a Morse code message back to Australia, have pleasure stating drove Volkswagen to Rumdoodle. Performance excellent. The VW was used to tow a loaded sledge weighing approximately 450 pounds to Mount Henderson for biological survey team. Snowfields and creviced hills were encountered, but no worry to the Red
What's
Terror.
up,
I am
Papa
more than
Sticky?
pleased with its
Welcome
performance
in, bro.
and the use it can be put to. The Beetle also became a common sight at the nearby Rumdoodle airfield, frequently employed as a transport for visiting VIPs. Amazing.
Crap, I'm going to hear about that one. I'm sorry. Toe for Life is also a previous guest on Sasquatch Shills. And I didn't say nothing about that sparkle simp trying to support vampires. You know those folks are going to eat you, right? I mean, the werewolves might eat you, but at least they're alive.
Amazingly, and despite
nobody gets either of those references, Team Edward.
The freezing temperatures and lack of roads, the Beetle performed near flawlessly, with few alterations or issues. However, as the miles racked up, the punishing effects of driving over the rough, corrugated, frozen surfaces around Mawson eventually caused some damage, notably cracks that developed in the chassis frame head, where the suspension tubes mounted to the frame. While this had to be frequently welded by base mechanics, over the course of the year, the Beetle soon racked up an incredible 1,500 miles in short trips around the base, on survey trips or on frequent taxi runs to Rumdoodle Airfield. In February 1964, the Nella Dan returned to Mawson, as she had done the year previously, sailing into the bay with a
I take it both your parents are midgets?
fresh crew to relieve those who had been working hard over the course of the year, including the Red Terror. On board the Nella Dan was another VW Beetle, adorned with the number plates Antarctica 2.
Wait, there's a whole bunch of jokes for that one. Let me get started. I'm only going to do one more. You know, your parents had sex at a very uncomfortable location, you know, like the back of a VW Beetle. What's up, Brandon Mitchell? Good to see you, bud. Contortionists, right? Were they with the circus? Was this a case of how many clowns you could fit in a car? I gotta stop. I'm so sorry. I apologize, dude. Like, oh my god, that's so weird.
Volkswagen Australia had supplied Inari with another brand new 1963 model year Beetle, this time painted in a striking international orange and fitted with a few upgrades based on what had been learnt with the original Antarctica 1, most notably being a strengthened suspension of front axle to help with the chassis frame head issues. She also had extra insulation added between the interior panels and the outer body, and a different set of decals. Antarctica 1, meanwhile, along with the members of the 1963 expedition, were packed onto the Nella Dan and soon departed back home to Australia, where Volkswagen were excitedly waiting to receive the Red Terror for a raft of promotional tours around the country. Meanwhile, the new Antarctica 2 was put to work in the same way as her older sibling, but less than a year into service, a fierce blizzard buried the small car, blowing fine powdered snow into the crankcase and causing irrevocable damage when the engine was eventually started. Now stuck in place, the orange Beetle remained buried under the snow for an entire winter, until she was eventually towed out in the spring, now almost entirely filled with snow and frozen completely solid. Realizing that the Beetle was now beyond repair for the Mawson
Kirk Douglas would crank that thing up. He'd hit it with a flamethrower to turn it over once. He'd go wriggle, wriggle, run.
Mechanics, she was eventually returned to Australia in February 1965, where Volkswagen were to repair and then return the car. However, when the Nella Dan returned to Mawson in February 1966 with the Antarctica 2, it was in fact a different car. Despite the same unique paint colour and decals, this was a 1965 model year Beetle, lacking the distinctive roof rack and Antarctica number plates, but otherwise...
You want to tell them anything before you go? It's up to you. Nope, she ain't telling y'all shit. Fuck you. You don't get to know nothing about her life. She don't like you. She don't want to hear from you. She don't want to tell you nothing. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Is visually identical to the original Antarctica 2. Volkswagen, probably not wanting to admit their famous Antarctica Beetles had suffered a severe breakdown and engine failure, never acknowledged this new Beetle as anything other than Antarctica 2. But ironically, this unofficial Antarctica 3 would go on to become one of the most reliable and longest serving of the VW Beetle fleet. With its improved engine sealing and strengthened chassis, it performed without complaint for many years and thousands of miles on the Mawson base. Volkswagen's marketing teams had by now all but moved on from the story of the Antarctic Beetle, but while the world had perhaps started to forget them, the trusty Antarctica 3 nevertheless worked away tirelessly, running between Rumdoodle Airfield, collecting supplies, or just for general transport around the base. Finally, in 1970, Antarctica 3, with 4 long hard seasons under her bonnet, was finally shipped back home, with none of the fanfare at the docks to greet it like there had been for the Red Terror all those years earlier. But while their time in Antarctica had now come to an end, the story was not over for the 3 Antarctic Beetles. Antarctica 1, returning to Australia in February 1964 at the height of her fame, was soon put on a promotional tour. First, she would have to be de-winterized, however, removing the ultra-thin Antarctic oil and replacing it with something more appropriate for the hot Australian climate. Much of the damage she had received was also repaired, including large sections of the chassis and front half of the vehicle where the main punishment from the hard Antarctic driving had occurred. After that, rather than a quiet retirement, Antarctica 1 was handed over to BP, who entered the Red Terror into the 1964 BP Rally of southeastern Australia. Amazingly, at the hands of her driver Ray Christie and navigator Joe Dunlop, this small Beetle, still adorned with her famous Antarctica 1 plates and decals, completed the BP Rally over hundreds of miles of tough Australian terrain and won first place, just 3 months after returning from a year of punishing service in Antarctica. It was yet another marketing coup for Volkswagen, solidifying the Beetle as a car capable of all conditions.
I gotta tell you, it's real rough out there in the world for a guy who looks like the Jack Link's jerky kid. It's just rough.
Climates and helping create record sales for Volkswagen Australia that year. Following her rally win, Antarctica went on a promotional tour of dealerships and BP service stations around the country. But only a few years later, the once famous, far-travelled Red Terror disappeared. The last sighting seemed to occur in the town of Seymour, Victoria, but it's as if the Beetle essentially vanished into thin air. There's no record of her number plates, no confirmed sightings of her. Some have said that the site where she was last photographed was later redeveloped, with rumours that a number of old VWs at this former dealership were scrapped, bulldozed, and buried in place. It's possible that Antarctica 1 is somewhere under these new buildings, or perhaps she was sequestered away to a barn or garage and is still sitting out there to this day, waiting to be found. For Antarctica 2, the story is strangely similar. After returning to be repaired, it was sold to a VW employee named Klaus Peters. Klaus fixed up Antarctica 2 and also went to race his orange Antarctic Beetle in the BP Rally of Victoria, which he also won. However, in 1969, Klaus moved back to his home country of Germany, and as this January 1969 copy of the newspaper The Age reveals, he offered his car up for sale. Beetle X Antarctica 2.
Is that what we're doing, Squatchkins? I still haven't figured out. Squatch Squad is what Age Out was saying. Squatchlings, children of the night. I don't know, man. I haven't hammered that one down yet. I don't know. We'll see.
Radio tachometer and more extras. Must sell going overseas. What happened to Antarctica 2 is unfortunately as unknown as Antarctica 1. There's little information as to what happened to her.
Lawless called me a Care Bear, like a real life Care Bear, which is funny because I think he looks like he drops common loot. But that's just me. What do I know? Just a Care Bear.
But much like her older sibling, she may still be out there somewhere waiting to be found. For Antarctica 3, her time in the Antarctic had left the car much more worn out and in need of repair. Far less famous or notable than her predecessors, the hard-working Beetle was eventually sold off to a Sydney VW dealer and racing driver Chris Hare. Hare rebuilt Antarctica 3 into a rallycross racer for the Catalina Rallycross series. In this illustration from Racing Car News in May 1973, the unique and distinctive international orange used only on Antarctica 2 and 3 can be clearly seen in the background. In 1974, however, she was sold to another rallycross driver, Ed Mulligan, but that same year, the series came to an end, and the trusty Antarctica 3, now in a poor state of disrepair, was probably confined to the scrap heap. And so the final fate of the 3 Antarctic Beetles, or the 3 official Antarctic Beetles, comes to an end, a slightly mysterious end. We don't really know what their final fates were, but we also don't have confirmation about the destruction of any of the 3 of them.
It's okay, bud. I can read misspellings. It's my second language.
Them officially. So, for Antarctica 1, it might be under a car park somewhere. However, it might be sequestered off to some barn. With Antarctica 2, the trail ran cold after it was sold in 1969, but who knows? Maybe
you got to respect the effort, though.
With Antarctica 3, more than likely it was, commenced to the scrap heap after the end of that rallycross tournament. But again, who really knows? But it's not the end of the story for the Antarctic Beetles, because not only were there actually more Beetles.
There are still old school Beetles built in Mexico to this day. They're still pumping them out left, right, and center. I'm not sure you can legally bring them back from Mexico. I don't think so. I don't know why not, but pretty sure.
Out in Antarctica than the 3 official ones. There's also a number of really fascinating replicas of specifically the original Antarctica 1. So the story goes that in the early 2000s, a number of enthusiasts who were really keen to figure out what finally happened to Antarctica 1 in that town of Seymour, Victoria, went to the town, interviewed people, tried to track it down.
Yes,
they were unfortunately
that is weird.
unable to locate what finally happened to the car. But in their search, they were able to track down the same model year Beetle that had rolled off the production line maybe 2 or 3 cars before Antarctica 1. And what they did was take that Beetle and try to create the most faithful reconstruction that they could. Now, it went on display in various places, and eventually it ended up in Germany, where to this day it still remains in a small private museum. Now, I was actually in contact with the owner of the museum. However, I didn't have time to actually set anything up. If you guys like this video, maybe one day I'll actually go out there and see it for myself. But I think the more fascinating story is the other replica of Antarctica 1. The daughter of Ray Christie, Sue, who followed her father's exploits when she was a child, who actually sat in Antarctica 1 when Ray Christie raced it in that BP rally, ended up becoming fascinated in the story and her father's exploits. And in around 2017, she found a Beetle of a very similar color and model year, and she thought this would be the perfect opportunity to recreate the BP rally Antarctica 1. The Antarctica 1 as it would have looked essentially before it disappeared. Now, I probably look very tired right now, and that's because I was lucky enough this morning to actually be able to call Sue. I managed to track her down, and I managed to get her to agree to have a video call where I called her up, and I was finally able to see the...
You're the second person I've had come at me about the PT Cruiser HHR. Listen, the power plant on that thing is absolute freaking trash. I love the body designs on both of them. I prefer the panel wagon version of the HHR, but whatever, man. However you want to swing that stick, you can swing it. But the fact is, the engine that was utilized was trash. It carbonized every surface on the inside of the block, and it would jelly all of your oil. And once it overheated, and it would overheat, always overheating, it would warp your head. You replace the head, scob down the edges, put your head back on, and you'd overheat and warp your head again. So if you can figure out a way to replace the engine that comes in the PT Cruiser with something reliable, you've probably got a decent vehicle there. CV joints, also trash, utter trash in those things. I mean, I've seen them just fall out riding down the road. I don't like them. I do not like them. I love the design. I think they could have been an amazing addition to the lineup of various GMC, Chevy, but I think they'd be terribly useful, but no.
Antarctica 1 replica that she has faithfully recreated.
Hi, Callum. How you doing?
Hello, is that Sue?
It sure is. I just happened to come across a red Beetle at a VW show. And, I said to my daughter, I said, oh, look, that's like what your grandfather used to drive. And because when I saw it was for sale, I got butterflies. And I thought, oh, I really want this car. And, so I rang the fella, and next thing I had the car, and then I had to explain to my husband why I bought a Volkswagen.
Now, I found this just amazing. And I think, to me, this is my favorite part of the story, because the real spirit of the Antarctica 1 project and this plucky little Beetle, I think, has been really faithfully recreated by Sue. And more than anything, it's a really touching tribute to her family.
I'll tell you what you do with that PT Cruiser, bud. You go get you one of them Turbo 4s out of a Sunfire and put it in. You'd still have a better engine than the PT Cruiser did. How many Sunfires you know that are still on the road? I haven't seen one in years.
Father, who was a fascinating man. Ray was employed by Volkswagen and was rallying and racing various cars for Volkswagen, basically to prove their abilities. And one of these cars was the Antarctica 1, but then he raced various cars across the country over the years. He sounds like a fascinating man, and he was actually still alive at the time that Sue purchased her version of Antarctica 1 to start the conversion process to turn it into this incredible...
I tell you what I want to do with one. I want to take an HHR and chop me a K5, put it on a Blazer chassis, ride out, son. Just go anywhere you want to go. up on blocks in the weeds. Right. That's because its freaking head, it overheated and warped the head. It blew the head gasket. And if you can go out there, you can take that car, you pop the head off about 2 hours, scrape all the crap off of it, slap a gasket in there, pop it together. You could drive it for 6 or 8 weeks, maybe 10, 15 years. You never know. Chances are about 6 or 8 weeks, you'll blow another head gasket. You can pare down the top and the bottom, get everything perfect and flawless, put the gasket back in, crank it up, drive it away, head gasket. I believe, hypothetically, if you got an oversized radiator kit put in one of those things, that you might be able to keep it cool enough not to blow the head gasket, but would it fucking be worth it? It's a sunfire.
Edible replica.
It would have been about 2017. At the time, my father was still alive, and he thought I was absolutely nuts. My dad was still alive. He passed away in 2018, so I just finished it before he passed away.
To me, the highlight of this entire project was being able to finally reach out to somebody who has that direct connection to Antarctica 1, and being able to see in person through some bleary eyes this morning, because I was pretty tired, in my opinion, most authentic recreation of the spirit of Antarctica 1, down there in Australia, the real home of this beetle, where it should be, living out its life. But there's another tantalizing twist to this story, and that is the fact that there was not just the 3 Antarctic beetles down in Antarctica. I think, based on all the research that I've done, there was at least 5 Volkswagen Beetles that made it down to Antarctica over the years. And again, at least. There might be more that I still haven't found to this day. Now, my favorite of the lot, you might have actually spotted in this video already. Keen-eyed viewers might have noticed in the background of some of the footage another very scruffy looking beetle down there in Antarctica. And you might have noticed it on my desk as well too. It's Antarctica 4 1/4. Now, this might sound a little bit unbelievable to us today, but it wasn't uncommon up until the 1980s for staff at these bases to take down with them, if there was space, their own private vehicles to Antarctica. Now, most of the time, this was just, motorbikes and stuff. But in 1967, or for the 1967 expedition, geologist Mark Forecast took with him an older 1957 Volkswagen Beetle, a very beat-up example that he basically rescued from a scrapyard. And it had a mismatched door. I believe the roof had been replaced at one point. And he basically used it down there as a beat-up runaround that he could use around the base and for running out onto glaciers and the like, similar to how the other Beetles were used. But Antarctica 4 1/4 also has the most dramatic and definitive end, and it's also probably the only Volkswagen Beetle that still remains out there to this day. See, in September 1967, Mark and his colleague Ian were traveling out onto one of the glaciers to test the depth of the ice and do other scientific measurements, when all of a sudden the Beetle cracked through the ice. Now, Ian and Mark made a mad scramble to try and escape the vehicle as it was trying to rapidly sink through the ice and down into the water. They were able to escape just in time and managed to watch as Antarctica 4 1/4 dropped underneath the surface and disappeared into the sea. So yeah, that was the dramatic end for Antarctica 4 1/4. And Mark, though, to this day still jokes that he still owns the Beetle. Of course, it's just trapped under something like 70 meters.
Right, one of those 96 GTs, bro, with the turbo 4 in it. Woo, son. Those things was hot. I'm telling you. You couldn't turn a donut into the damn thing to save your life. All that weight sitting on them back wheels, it just would not drift loose properly.
Meters allegedly. Of water. So while that may end the story of the 4 1/4 Volkswagen Beetles that made it out to the Australians, there was a 5th Volkswagen Beetle that made it out to the New Zealanders. It looks like for the 1966 to 1967 season, presumably Volkswagen New Zealand sent out as part of a promotional campaign, maybe seeing the success of what happened with the Antarctica 1 program in Australia, a Volkswagen Beetle to Scott Base, the New Zealand base in Antarctica. Now, this New Zealand Beetle was also red. It also had a roof rack, and it had some slightly more knobbly off-road tires at the back too. But it didn't seem to do much. There's a lot of photos of it sitting outside Scott Base, but I don't see any photos of it actually being put to use. However, I never really had much time to research that. It was actually something I found at the very end of this process as I was looking for some final photos of it out there. And so that is, I think, the story of all of the Antarctic beetles that made it down to Antarctica. Although I would not be surprised if it turned out there was even more that went down there. And I would say, though, they are the most successful small car that made it down to Antarctica because, quite famously, there was a Mini that was taken down there that was converted to have tank tracks on it. I actually made a video about that. I'll leave a link in the description. And for the New Zealanders, the Kiwis decided to take out not just a Volkswagen Beetle, they also took out a Fiat 500. Now, there are very few photos of this, and I don't think any videos of it in action. But this amazing book called Bambina, which tells the story of the Fiat 500 in New Zealand, has this remarkable photo of their Fiat 500 in place down there at Scott Base. And it looks like this was around 1964, 1965. So I don't think there was a crossover with the New Zealand Antarctic Beetle, but it's quite amazing to think all these small people's cars that were becoming so famous in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, all in their own way started to end up down in Antarctica. Anyway, a big topic that has taken me a long time to research and draw things together. I was up today at about 2 a.m. calling Sue down there in Australia to get that little footage and interview with her, which I think really just...
Oh, that's pimp. I like that. We could call it the Go-Go Snow Racer. Right? Dude. That's just rude. No. You tickling an old redneck's pickle over here. Look at that. That man thinking redneck thoughts. Okay, so we are at the worst criminal gangs ever existed that you didn't know existed. This is from Mafia Flicks. They have a unique style. I'm not gonna lie, it's not one of my favorite, but it's an interesting style and it's unique and it reminds me it reminds me of Dead Bug Says. If you haven't checked out Dead Bug Says, he's got a really weird sort of true crime channel. It's not for children, but he kind of talks like an old mid-50s gangster, maybe one of those gumshoe sleuths from back in the 20s. You're like, hey boss, like, what are you doing?
Rumored to be a hitter, a female assassin. She was rumored to be a hitter, a female assassin for a faction of the notorious gangster disciples. While law enforcement sources suspected her involvement in 3 to 5 shootings, Street Talk suggested a much higher number, possibly around 15. But this wasn't charity work. She charged a jaw-dropping $40,000 per person, amassing a fortune of $40 million in the 80s and 90s. She was like the Gordon Gekko of human smuggling. One of her favorite hobbies included serving cocaine to young girls and hosting wild orgies at her Miami home. That cat definitely knew how to party. She was even perceived as compassionate for granting one man's wish to get a bullet in the head instead of decapitation. From teenage assassins to human smuggling, kingpins, and the notorious Cocaine Godmother, these stories will take you deep into the female criminal underworld. First up on our list is a lovely girl, also known as the teenage assassin.
You'll pardon me if I don't put that directly up on the up on the screen, right?
On Chicago's main streets. Before Gakira Barnes met a tragic end in a barrage of bullets on Chicago's south side, her mother had been hearing unsettling rumors about her daughter. At just 17 years old, this 5'3", 128-pound girl was not your typical teenager. She wasn't just involved with gang activity, she was rumored to be a hitter, a female assassin for a faction of the notorious gangster disciples. While law enforcement sources suspected her involvement in 3 to 5 shootings, Street Talk suggested a much higher number, possibly around 15.
That's impressive.
Gakira's mother, Chantel Brown, couldn't definitively confirm her daughter's role as a shooter. Despite a previous charge of firing a gun at age 14, the case later dismissed due to witness recantation. That's a fancy word for retraction, by the way. Brown had never seen a gun at home. She was left wondering if her daughter's rap music videos featuring handguns were just swagger or something more sinister. Yet those who knew Gakira from her early days at Perspective's Math and Science Academy were shocked by her transformation. Initially a timid student, she gradually became more outgoing in the 8th grade. She aimed to receive a quality education and attend college. However, Gakira's life took a dark turn. leading to her involvement in the juvenile justice system and eventually her dropout from school. Her path collided with the violent rivalry between the gangster disciples and their rivals in Woodlawn neighborhood, a feud she may have been involved in. Although law enforcement believed her responsible for multiple shootings and possibly a murder, they lacked the necessary evidence to charge her. Gakira's fearless persona was evident on social media, where she openly clashed with her enemies and even issued warnings to the police. Tragically, on April the 11th, a hooded assailant gunned her down in front of her home. While she had a reputation as a dangerous figure on the streets, it's rare for females to be involved as trigger pullers in gang-related shootings. Despite her turbulent life, Gakira Barnes was not just a perpetrator.
I wonder about that though. You reckon there's a reason why it's fewer gang-related females? I don't know.
But also a victim of the streets she called home. Her story serves as a chilling reminder of the challenges everyday parents face in steering their children away from the dangerous glamour of the gang lifestyle. If you thought this chick was wild, the next cat on our list can blow her out of the water. Meet Sister Pink, the not-so-friendly neighborhood snakehead of New York.
What was it Hellboy said? 1-inch gauge. I'm not a real good shot, but I use really big bullets.
Chinatown, who turned illegal immigration into a multi-million-dollar operation with all the intrigue and drama.
Hey, boo-boo, what you doing?
Of a Hollywood thriller. In her heyday, Sister Ping was no ordinary entrepreneur. As the head of an underground crime syndicate, she orchestrated the covert migration of some 3,000 Chinese immigrants to the land of the American dream.
Welcome to America.
But this wasn't charity work. She charged a jaw-dropping $40,000
We might have to go look up Bob Barker. That's a good story.
per person, amassing a fortune of $40 million in the 80s and 90s. She was like the Gordon Gekko of human smuggling. Her clientele embarked on treacherous voyages from Hong Kong to Guatemala and New York, often crammed on very unstable and decaying ships like the infamous Golden Venture. Tragically, some didn't make it, with 10 souls perishing in a desperate attempt to swim ashore. Yet amidst the horrors, some in New York's Chinatown saw Sister Ping as a savior, providing opportunities and lending a helping hand to her fellow Fujianese immigrants. But the FBI wasn't buying it. Over a dozen years of investigation revealed a darker side to Sister Ping's operation. She hired violent thugs to force and threaten her clients into settling their debts, making her empire, as ruthless as it was, always profitable.
Just to pay the bills.
Sister Ping's own journey to America began in 1981 when she arrived as an illegal immigrant from Hong Kong. As the great entrepreneur she was, she immediately found loopholes in the system. She got false naturalization papers and brought her family over from China. Seeing a business opportunity in the loosening immigration rules, she set up an illicit banking scheme and started shipping people from China to Central America before their final destination in the United States. Her criminal empire faced a setback in 1989 when she was arrested for attempting to bribe an officer. However, she served just 4 months in prison before getting back to business. The Tiananmen Square protests opened a floodgate of Chinese immigration. This was like steroids to her smuggling trade, but also attracted ruthless gangs into the mix. In New York, failure to pay her fees often led to torture and lives being ended. By the early 90s, Sister Ping had diversified her ill-gotten gains into various businesses in Chinatown. She became a restaurateur and even waited tables herself. You better tip her well. All this while her smuggling ring reached new heights under the guidance of gangster RK. When the FBI finally caught up with her, thanks to associates of the Fok Chin gang spilling the beans, Sister Ping was indicated in 1994 but managed to jump bail. She continued to...
How do you tell somebody that you're a member of that gang?
In 1994, but managed to jump bail. She continued her operations in China until she was arrested herself. You better tip her well. All this while her smuggling ring reached new heights under the guidance of gangster RK. When the FBI finally caught up with her, thanks to associates of the Fok Chin gangs, Sister Ping was indicated in 1994, but managed to jump bail. She continued her operations in China until she was arrested in Hong Kong and extradited to the US CwS in 2003. Facing a cascade of witnesses and evidence, Sister Ping's defense crumbled and she was slapped with a 35-year prison sentence. In 2014, the mother of all snakeheads met her end in prison at the age of 65. To some, she remained a folk hero, but to the courts, she was the ruthless mastermind behind one of the most infamous human smuggling gangs in history. Now, the next cat on our list even made it to Hollywood, the Cocaine Godmother. Meet Griselda Blanco, the not-so-average mobster who could give the toughest male gangsters
Welcome
a run
in,
for their
Swiss, man.
money.
It's good
A
to
life
see you.
story reads like a Hollywood blockbuster, and it's no
Jenica,
wonder Catherine
Dennis Bowles, good to
Zeta-Jones
see you.
played her in the cable channel biopic Cocaine Godmother. In the wild, drug-fueled era of 1970s and 1980s Miami, Blanco was notorious for her cold-heartedness and cunning as a narco-smuggler. She wasn't just bloodthirsty, she was ruthless. She had ordered men tortured and even laughed while they suffered, all in the name of protecting her family, of course. The body count attributed to her ranges from 40 to a staggering 200, spanning from Miami to New York. One chilling incident involved a hitman missing his target and accidentally killing a 2-year-old boy. Blanco's response? Gratitude that the child's death would distress her intended victim. Her motives were as twisted as her actions, including ordering the execution of a married couple in front of their children.
That bitch is crazy.
Her drug empire was one of the largest of the Colombian mafias in the United States. To smuggle thousands of pounds
What's
of cocaine
up?
from Colombia to the US, she got creative and even designed special women's
How you
underwear
doing?
and had
Good to see
suitcases
ya.
with hidden compartments. She earned the nickname La Madrina, the godmother, but not for her nurturing qualities. She was more like the Black Widow, having killed her 3 husbands in fits of anger. One of her favorite hobbies included serving cocaine to young girls and hosting wild orgies at her Miami home. That cat definitely knew how to party. She was even perceived as compassionate for granting one man's wish to get a bullet in the head instead of decapitation. All Mother Teresa, if you ask me. Born in poverty and abuse in Colombia, Blanco put her first kill on her resume at just 11 years old. She fled to the US, where her drug empire raked in millions at the cost of countless lives. Eventually, she was arrested in California in 1985 and sentenced to prison. In 1994, she faced the death penalty for her heinous crimes, but managed to escape it due to a bizarre scandal involving phone sex between prosecution witnesses. You literally cannot make this shit up. Instead, she got 3 concurrent 20-year sentences. Thanks to lenient sentencing guidelines, she was released in 2004 and deported to Colombia. But don't worry, karma is a very patient bitch. And on September the 3rd, 2012, an assassin on a motorcycle gunned her down in a butcher's shop. Even in retirement, Blanco couldn't escape the violence she once orchestrated.
All right, so I know I'm returning to the watering hole on this one. And actually, we can't do all of them. That's like an hour and 25 minutes. But we can cover the first one. And then we'll see where we go with that. How's that? This dude's funny. Which dude? That dude or this other dude? Some other dude? Probably not me. Stay. I think I'm getting sick. Criminal Core. I really dig their stuff, man. This is like a huge freaking composite of several different cases. Skadoosh. Skadoosh.
31-year-old Mary Catherine Edwards lived in Beaumont, Texas in 1995. She was a respected teacher and had a large circle of friends and a close-knit family. Mary was last seen on the evening of Friday, January 13th of 1995 at the new townhouse she just moved into. Her parents grew concerned the following day when she did not respond to phone calls. They went to her home to check on her welfare, and they found a horrific scene. Mary had been drowned in her own bathroom. She had been handcuffed with her hands behind her back. An autopsy revealed that she had been assaulted as well. Investigators collected male DNA from her body and stored it for future use. For more than 25 years, the case remained unsolved. Then in April of 2020, investigators began using genetic genealogy to help find a suspect. They first found several distant cousins, which led them closer and closer to an arrest. Eventually, the DNA led them to Clayton Bernard Foreman. Foreman and Mary attended the same high school. They were also casual friends.
Much love, Art.
Mary was even
and remember, don't let the man get you down.
Bridesmaid at the wedding of Foreman and his first wife. Investigators also learned that the crime against Mary had similarities to a 1981 assault of one of Foreman's high school classmates. Foreman pleaded guilty to that crime and received 3 years of probation. Foreman was arrested in May of 2021 in Franklin County, Ohio, where he lived, and was charged with taking Mary Catherine Edwards' life. On Wednesday, September 22nd of 2021, Foreman was indicted. A date for the trial has not yet been released. 24-year-old Firuza Dagunpour was a student at the University of Nebraska in Omaha in 1983. She disappeared from the college campus on August 13th of 1983 after attending her evening classes. Then, a day later, on August 14th, her body was discovered by fishermen under a bridge in Pigeon Creek in nearby Council Bluffs, Iowa. An autopsy would determine that Firuza had been beaten, stabbed in the abdomen, and slashed in the throat. Over the next few months, several agencies worked together to try to find the culprit. Unfortunately, they were unable to, and the case went cold. Then, in 2020, one of Firuza's friends reached out to investigators with the name of a possible suspect in the case. Investigators were quickly able to rule that person out because he had a solid alibi. When they took a new look at the case, though, they saw that detectives who worked on the initial investigation collected several pieces of evidence from the crime scene that might be useful now with advances in DNA technology. The evidence included a bra, underwear, blouse, notebooks, computer printouts, work gloves, prescription glasses, a beer can, and 2 pens. All of these items had been stored at the sheriff's office for nearly 4 decades. Investigators sent the items to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation Laboratory for DNA testing and learned in March of 2021 that a blood-stained glove found at the scene contained Firuza's DNA and that of a male. They were able to match the unidentified DNA to Bud Leroy Christensen through the National Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, database. Investigators also found Christensen's fingerprints on papers that had been found near the body. Christensen has a long criminal history with many similar crimes that he has committed over the years. On April 30th of 2021, authorities announced that Christensen had been arrested and charged with taking Firuza's life. Crime scene technician Hadley Mikovic said during the press conference that the arrest in the case was made possible because of the significant technological advances in DNA analysis in recent decades. I would like to encourage the family and friends of victims to never give up hope and continue to work diligently with law enforcement agencies handling their investigations.
Hear, hear.
Let Firuza's case be an example that it is never too late to seek answers, she said. Firuza's brother and father, who live in London and Iran respectively, were notified that an arrest was made. In late January of 1994, the owner of Bob's Car Wash in Jeanerette, Louisiana, made a gruesome discovery. He was taking out the trash when he found a deceased female baby inside a 55-gallon garbage can behind his business. The local coroner, Dr. James Fault.
Oh, that's harsh. Oh, that's harsh. Oh.
Did the autopsy. He also delivered the eulogy at the unnamed girl's funeral and addressed the 200 plus mourners. He said that when he saw the infant with her thumb in her mouth, he began to have cold thoughts of anger, of depression, and sadness. Dr. Falterman also noted that the girl was alive when she was thrown away and that she probably lived just a few hours before succumbing to the cold. I couldn't find a sketch of the baby, but she was described as black and female and was named Baby Jane Doe. The acting police chief at the time, Kerry Davis, vowed to find the child's mother. It may not have happened on his watch, and it may have taken 25 years, but authorities say that it finally happened. The child's mother, 50-year-old Sonia Charles of New Iberia, was arrested in September of 2019. The Iberia Parish Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit recently reopened the case after new leads were developed. The department's spokesperson, Major Wendell Rayborn, explained that a local cold case group helped bring renewed attention to the case and that new leads were brought to investigators' attention. DNA evidence collected from both baby Jane Doe and the crime scene was recently re-examined by a local laboratory, which in turn developed a DNA profile. That DNA profile, according to the Sheriff's Department, matched a sample obtained from Sonia Charles. Private investigator Stephen Maynard started the Cold Case Advocacy Group, which shone a new spotlight on this case. It's going to take a long time to heal. Family members know who she is now, he said. Maybe the baby can finally get a name. In May of 2021, an Iberia Parish grand jury indicted 52-year-old Sonia Parrish for taking the life of her newborn daughter. Following the indictment, she was booked into the Iberia Parish jail on a $250,000 bond. Charles faces life in prison without parole if convicted. "45-year-old Susan Tice lived in Toronto, Canada in 1983. She was a mother of 4 children and worked as a social worker. Her body was found in the upstairs bedroom of her recently purchased home on Grace Street on August 17, 1983. She had moved to Toronto from Calgary in July and separated from her husband, who was living in a downtown townhouse. By the time her...
They make stupid people famous. I'm going to give you a bit of advice that I got from Jim Carrey by watching one of his movies. Stop breaking the law, asshole. It served me well.
Her body was found by a relative. The mail had piled up outside of her home. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to the chest. An autopsy was unable to determine when exactly her life ended. Police admitted that they had few leads on the case. A detective said at the time, "We have no suspect at all." 4 months later, on December 20th of 1983, 22-year-old Erin Gilmore's body was found in her Toronto apartment. A friend who went to pick her up for a cocktail party found Erin's body. Like Susan Tice, Erin had been stabbed, assaulted, and found in her bedroom. Police canvassed door to door to no avail. Erin was an aspiring clothing designer from a wealthy family. Her father, David Gilmore, had been the business...
That do happen sometime, bro. It sucks, but it do happen.
...business partner of tycoon Peter Monk, co-founder of the mining company Barrick Gold. It was Monk's son who found Erin's body. For years, then decades, investigators knew little about what happened to Susan and Erin, except that they suffered a similar fate. In 2008, advances in DNA technology brought a break, confirming through evidence at the scenes that one man was responsible for what happened to both Susan and Erin. But it would take nearly 15 more years and even greater scientific advances to identify who he was. Recently, via a combination of advanced genetic sequencing, forensic genealogy, and traditional police work that's now regularly cracking open decades-old cases,
investigators arrested 60-year-old Joseph George Sutherland from Moosonee, Ontario, Canada, in connection with Susan and Aaron's cases. Moosonee is a remote community far removed from the slayings that police allege he committed nearly 40 years ago. Detective Sergeant Stephen Smith, the lead Toronto police investigator, speculated that Sutherland had been waiting for the knock to come at the door. Smith told reporters that a second phase of the investigation must now begin. A painstaking review of Sutherland's whereabouts in the intervening 39 years. Obviously, we're going to look into every possible connection to any possible case throughout Ontario to ensure that he isn't responsible for any other offenses, Smith said. The cases are just the latest advances through genetic genealogy, a cutting-edge process that has breathed new life into old cases all but declared unsolvable. Detective Smith said that the scientific advances were the only way the cases were ever going to be solved. Joseph Sutherland was 22 years old at the time that he took the lives of Susan and Aaron. He was never a suspect in the case, nor had he ever been interviewed. He had been living in Toronto at the time, but later moved to Moosonee. A Facebook profile for Sutherland reveals a person going about a seemingly normal life, enjoying the outdoors and requesting recommendations for services like an electrician, while griping with everyday problems. Retired Toronto detective Mark Mendelson said that investigators can also turn to classic techniques to identify any other crimes they believe Sutherland may be responsible for, including photo lineups. If previous cases had eyewitnesses as well as fingerprint analysis, now that Sutherland's fingerprints will be in a centralized system known as AFIS, he said it's also entirely possible that Sutherland never went on to commit other violent acts. But he said there isn't enough statistical data about serial criminals to have an informed discussion about it. The former cop said one thing is certain. It's a clear example of, ain't science wonderful? Sutherland is scheduled to appear in court soon in 2023. One of Aaron Gilmore's brothers, Sean McCowan, had this to say about the arrest. The best call I've ever received. This is a day that I, and we, have been waiting almost an entire lifetime for, McCowan said. For nearly 4 decades, the culprit had been a ghost, said McCowan, adding that his mother, who passed away 2 years ago, never recovered from the loss of her only daughter. She would have been so relieved that there had been an arrest, and so happy that someone will face justice after being anonymous for 39 years, McCowan said. On May 23rd of 1992, a woman's body was found dumped behind a construction shed in North Memorial Drive, just outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. She was quickly identified as 31-year-old Kim Marlene McVeigh. Kim had been shot in the head.
Absolutely. That's kind of what I was sitting here thinking when I kind of stared off into space. I'm like, dude's got an MO, he's got a method, he's got an entire... the full docket for being a serial killer, but only has one body. Doubt. X to doubt. Give me an X in chat if you doubt that one. I don't know. It seems sketchy to me.
There were no known witnesses to the crime and no DNA evidence. No one came forward with useful information, and the case went cold. But then recently, witnesses did come forward. They told police that a man by the name of Tommy Edward Harris confessed to them that he took Kim's life.
That is to say that if you are responsible for a naughty event in the past that possibly left DNA evidence, and your sister, your brother, your mother, your father, or any of them people go in and have their 23andMe done, you're liable to get brought up on charges immediately afterwards. Right, 2 bodies that they X'd out everything. Hello, Lucy. Welcome back. She dipped out. She's got baby things doing.
life. Kim, Harris, and a few other unnamed individuals were staying in the same house. The house was described as a known drug house. On May 16th of 1992, 7 days before her body was found, a man entered the house to settle a deal that had gone bad. This individual wanted to get his money back. A gun battle then took place. This man took Kim in a headlock and dragged her outside. The man then made demands of Tommy Harris. Harris fired a gun and it struck Kim in the left temple. Harris then dragged her body into the house and later hid her remains behind the shed out back. Tommy Harris was arrested on May 14th of 2020. Tulsa County Sheriff Vic Regalado said this is a bittersweet moment. Bitter in the fact that Kim McVeigh still has family. They have been notified, but they're out of state and were unable to be here today. Our hearts certainly go out to them. And sweet in the fact that we now have been able to provide closure to her family. It was years in the making, but again, at the end of the day, justice is sometimes slow-moving, but still happens. The man who entered the house looking for money has since passed away. Kim's family, who did not attend the police briefing, also have not yet made a statement after hearing about the arrest. Rachel Johnson was a single mother who lived in Akron, Ohio in 1991. In March of the same year, she had been in a friend's vehicle when they got a flat tire. They pulled into the parking lot of a convenience store at the corner of Dan Street and Glenwood Avenue. A small faded gray vehicle pulled into the lot behind them. Rachel got into that vehicle and drove off with the man. It is believed that the man offered to take her home. However, later in the day, her body was discovered on Weller Avenue. She was assaulted, stabbed multiple times, and even set on fire after being dumped in the street. Investigators collected DNA evidence from Rachel's body. They entered it into databases, but did not find a match. It was only in 2019, when the Akron Police Department partnered with Advanced DNA, that a match could be made. Advanced DNA is a genetic testing company in Texas that has helped solve a lot of cold cases recently. In March of 2020, 57-year-old Daniel Lee Reese was arrested in connection with the case. His DNA matched the suspect's DNA that was found at the crime scene back in 1991. Reese, who would have been 28 years old at the time of the crime, was booked into the Summit County Jail. He is apparently known to Rachel's family. Reese had been spotted in the same area that she was last seen alive, but he was never looked into during the initial investigation. Reese also lived right across the street from Rachel. After he took her life, he would often spend time with her daughter, who went to live with Rachel's mother. The daughter never expected that this man she knew from childhood was the man who took her mother's life. Detective James Pashelik said that the DNA was the key to solving this case. That's what broke the case. He also said that it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. And in this case, we have. 21-year-old Julie Ann Gonzalez lived in Dripping Springs, Texas in 2010. She was married to George De La Cruz, but they were estranged and not living together. The two were in the middle of getting a divorce. Julie and George had a young daughter named Layla together, who was about 2 years old at the time. Julia was always busy with her job as a pharmacy technician, going to school and spending time with her daughter. She was described as hardworking.
My sister did it just as soon as it became available. She immediately signed up, paid whatever she had to pay. And back then it was expensive. I looked at her and was like, snitch.
And a kind-hearted person. Julie's loved ones stated how she had embraced her motherly duties and was bringing her child up independently. On March 26th of 2010, Julie was last seen by George. He said that Julie had come over to drop their daughter off as they shared custody of her. Julie's aunt, Dora Soto, expected Julie to contact her that day, but she did not. Dora tried to reach her, but failed to do so. When she did not respond to texts and calls, her family began to wonder. Julie's aunt, her mom Sandra, and sister Samantha spoke to George. George claimed that Julie told him she was going away for a few days on a trip. They all said that Julie would not have left behind her daughter and would have at least told one family member that she was leaving. Julie's family said her daughter was her world, and she would never leave her behind. Julie was also very reliable and in constant contact with her family. By 11 p.m. that night, Julie's aunt and mom reported her missing to the Austin, Texas police. The police did not have any evidence that Julie hadn't left of her own accord. They said that she was an adult and was allowed to leave. Julie's mom and aunt mentioned that her new car was also missing. The next day, on March 27th of 2010, Julie's family and her new boyfriend, Aaron, were receiving text messages from her. Julie's sister believed it was her as she had referred to her by her nickname. Julie's aunt, mom, and boyfriend weren't so sure. Aaron had just received a message from Julie that she was breaking up with him. Her mom was shocked because Julie was madly in love with him. Julie, or someone using her phone, had also posted a message on Facebook that she was depressed and posted some messages to her MySpace page. On MySpace, Julie had wrote that she had met a man named James in Colorado and couldn't wait to start her life over there. Julie's aunt and mom knew that these messages weren't Julie. Julie would not have left her daughter, and it wasn't how she would write. Aaron asked Julie to tell him what his middle name was. The person on the other end said they don't have time for games and never sent any other messages to Julie's family members. Investigators still weren't sure if she left on her own or if foul play was involved. But they did speak to George, as he was the last person who saw Julie alive. George only told them that Julie dropped off their daughter and then she left abruptly. Julie's family began their own investigation. Her aunt went driving around South Austin and spotted Julie's new car in the parking lot of a Walgreens. Her aunt ran inside, looked all over the store for Julie, but she was nowhere to be found. Concerned about what she could find, Julie's aunt contacted Julie's mother. Together, they checked Julie's trunk but didn't find her. They did spot a paper bag in the back seat, which had asthma medication inside for Julie's daughter. It wasn't like Julie to not give George such an important medication for their own daughter. Julie's family asked one of the employees inside Walgreens if Julie had been there. They showed him.
Well, yeah, there actually is due process to it, because while they get say two of your brothers go to 23andMe and you raped somebody in 1983, right? They voluntarily gave up their DNA, and if their DNA combined is solid enough to get a warrant to get your DNA, that is the due process that takes place. I'm not saying it's enough, but it is technically due process.
Him a picture and he said she looked familiar. They also asked him if he knew anything about the car outside. He said that a girl had entered the store and she said she was having car issues. The police obtained the surveillance footage from Walgreens. There were several women that matched the description of Julie, but Julie herself had not entered the store. Julie's family then plastered the city with a billboard, posters, and handed out t-shirts with Julie's picture on them. The police looked at Julie's phone records and social media accounts. Her phone and social media had gone quiet. It hadn't been used since March 27th of 2010, the day after she was last seen. George's mom, Victoria de la Cruz, made a frantic phone call to the police. She asked them to come to her house. Victoria called them because she had found a large hole in the storage shed of the home she shared with her son. Victoria told them that she started to dig, but then she got scared and decided it's best to call the police. When detectives arrived, Victoria was covered in dirt and was clearly shaken. The hole that she had contacted them about looked eerily like a grave. George told the police that the hole was an electrical trench. Investigators decided to dig anyway, but found no sign of Julie in the hole. The police obtained Julie's bank records. They found that on the day Julie was last seen, George had used her card at Walmart and Best Buy. George had purchased an Xbox Points card at Best Buy because he had an obsession with video games. His obsession was one of the reasons he and Julie got divorced. George would have...
All right, folks, that's my 2 hours that I'm putting up for everybody. I appreciate y'all coming by. We're going to pick this up. We might start with this. We might go looking for Mar Barker. We might do that thing. I don't know. There's a couple of different ideas I have already socked into the old show clips file. I need to make another show clips file for different shows, I suppose. But I appreciate everybody coming by. I love each and every one of you like a brother and a sister. I'm going to play this thing one last time because I like it, damn it. I thought it was an excellent build. And it's not my fault I don't get to use it ever again.